In just 41 seconds, one of Hollywood's most respected legends completely dismantled a morning show host on live television. What started as a simple conversation about movies turned into an absolute meltdown that had America's living icon storming off the set while millions watched in shock. This is the story of how Michael Strahan pushed too far and learned why you never mess with Clint Eastwood. Before we get into this explosive story, make sure you subscribe to this channel for daily videos exposing Hollywood's darkest scandals. Hit that bell icon so you never miss the drama. The Good Morning America studio was buzzing with energy as crew members rushed around making final preparations. Clint Eastwood sat in the guest chair, calm and composed like he always is. At 94 years old, the man still carried himself with that quiet strength that made him a legend. He wore a simple gray shirt and dark jacket, looking exactly like someone who didn't need to prove anything to anyone. Across from him sat Michael Strahan, flashing that big smile he's known for, shuffling through his note cards like he was getting ready for just another interview. The cameras started rolling, and Strahan jumped right in with his usual enthusiasm. "Clint Eastwood, welcome to Good Morning America. It's such an honor to have you here." His voice was loud and energetic, the kind of energy that fills a room whether you want it to or not. Clint nodded slowly, his face showing that classic Eastwood expression that doesn't give much away. "Good to be here, Michael." Strahan leaned forward in his chair, already moving to his first question. "So Clint, you've been making movies for over 6 decades. That's incredible. But I gotta ask, at your age, why are you still doing this? I mean, don't you think it's time to just relax and enjoy retirement?" There was a pause, the kind of pause that makes you uncomfortable if you're paying attention. Clint's eyes narrowed just slightly, and anyone who knows anything about Clint Eastwood knows that look means something. "At my age?" he repeated, his voice still calm but with an edge that wasn't there before. "What exactly are you trying to say, Michael?" Strahan laughed it off, waving his hand like it was nothing. No, I just mean you've accomplished so much. You're a legend. Wouldn't it be nice to just kick back and let the younger generation take over?" "The younger generation," Clint said slowly, like he was tasting the words. "You mean the people who make the same superhero movie 15 times and call it original?" A few crew members in the studio tried to hide their smiles. Strahan's face tightened for just a second before he recovered. "Well, audiences love those movies. They make billions of dollars." "Making money doesn't mean making art," Clint replied. His voice was still quiet, but there was steel in it now. "I keep working because I have stories to tell. Stories that matter. Not because I'm trying to sell lunchboxes and action figures to kids." Strahan shifted in his seat. You could see he wasn't expecting this kind of pushback. Sure, I respect that. But speaking of stories, let's talk about your political views. You've been pretty vocal over the years about your conservative beliefs. Some people say your movies push a certain agenda. This is where things started to go sideways. Clint's jaw tightened and he leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "My movies tell stories about human beings, about right and wrong, about people doing what they believe in. If you see that as pushing an agenda, maybe you should look at your own bias." "My bias?" Strahan said, his smile fading now. "I'm just asking questions that people want answered, Clint." "No, you're making assumptions," Clint shot back. "You invited me here to talk about my work, but what you really want is to put me in some kind of box. Conservative Hollywood guy. Out of touch old-timer. That's the story you want, isn't it?" The studio got very quiet. Camera operators glanced at each other. The producers in the control room were probably losing their minds. But out on the set, it was just 2 men staring at each other. Strahan tried to recover with another laugh, but this one sounded forced. "Come on, Clint, you're being sensitive. I'm just having a conversation here." "Sensitive?" Clint's voice rose slightly, which for him might as well have been shouting. "You started this conversation by asking why someone my age is still working. Like I should be in a nursing home somewhere. Then you moved to politics because you want to make me the bad guy for your audience. This isn't a conversation, Michael. This is an ambush." Strahan's face was getting red now. "An ambush? Are you serious right now? I'm one of the most respected hosts in morning television. I've interviewed presidents, athletes, actors. I don't ambush people." "Then what do you call this?" Clint gestured around the studio. "You bring me on your show, act all friendly, then start throwing loaded questions at me, hoping I'll say something controversial so you can get your viral moment. I've been doing this longer than you've been alive, son. I know exactly what this is. The word son hung in the air like a challenge. Strahan's jaw clenched, and his hands gripped the armrests of his chair. You know what, Clint? Maybe the problem isn't me. Maybe the problem is that you can't handle being questioned. You're so used to everyone treating you like some untouchable icon that you forgot what real journalism looks like. Real journalism? Clint actually laughed at that, a dry, humorless sound. You work for a morning show that spends half its time talking about celebrity gossip, and the other half pushing whatever narrative your network wants. Don't talk to me about journalism. Strahan stood up now, and his voice got louder. You don't get to come on my show and disrespect what we do here. We inform millions of Americans every single morning. We matter. Clint stayed seated, which somehow made him look even more powerful than Strahan standing over him. You matter? He said quietly. Michael, you read from a teleprompter and smile at cameras. The people who write your questions matter. The producers who tell you what to say matter. You're just the face they put on screen. That did it. Strahan's composure completely cracked. Are you calling me a puppet? Is that what you're doing right now? I'm calling it like I see it, Clint replied, his voice still calm. You didn't come up with these questions on your own. Someone told you to ask about my age, about my politics, about retirement. They wanted you to rattle me, to get me worked up so they could have something to clip for social media. But I'm not playing that game. A producer tried to step in from off camera, probably trying to signal for a commercial break, but Strahan ignored them. He was fully committed now, his professional mask completely gone. You know what your problem is, Clint? You're stuck in the past. The world has moved on, but you're still making these movies about lone cowboys and tough guys who don't talk about their feelings. Nobody wants that anymore. Clint finally stood up, and even at 94, he had a presence that filled the room. Nobody wants it? My last film made over $200 million. People do want it, Michael. They're starving for it because everything else is the same recycled garbage. They want stories about people with principles, about sacrifice and honor and doing the right thing even when it's hard. Not this superficial bullshit where everyone's worried about saying the right thing to avoid getting canceled. The crew members' eyes went wide at the swear word. This was live morning television, and Clint Eastwood just dropped the B word on Good Morning America. Strahan seized on it immediately. Oh, so now we're cursing on live TV? Real professional, Clint. You want professional? Clint's voice finally rose to match Strahan's volume. Here's professional. A real host does his homework. He respects his guests. He asks thoughtful questions that lead to meaningful conversation. You did none of that. You wanted a circus, and when I didn't perform like your trained monkey, you got upset. Strahan pointed his finger at Clint, his voice shaking with anger now. I don't have to stand here and take this from you. This is my show. My show, and if you don't like how I run things, there's the door. The studio went dead silent. Everyone was frozen, waiting to see what would happen next. Clint looked at Strahan for a long moment, and that classic Eastwood stare said more than any words could. Then he reached up and unclipped his microphone, letting it drop to the floor with a thud that echoed through the studio. You don't have to ask me twice, Clint said. His voice was calm again, which somehow made it even more powerful. I've wasted enough time here. But Strahan wasn't done. He was too worked up, too angry to let it go. Yeah, walk away. That's what you tough guys do when things get real, right? You run. Clint stopped and turned back. The look on his face made several crew members take a step back. Run? Boy, I've been in this business since before your parents were born. I've directed Oscar-winning films. I've worked with the greatest actors and filmmakers in history. I've earned the right to walk away from disrespect. What have you earned? The right to smile pretty and read other people's words? Get out of my studio, Strahan said, his voice low and dangerous now. It's not your studio, Michael. You just work here, and from what I've seen today, you don't even do that very well. Clint started walking toward the exit, his steps slow and deliberate. Strahan followed him, still shouting, You're a relic. Nobody cares about your opinions anymore. The world has passed you by. Clint stopped at the edge of the set and turned one last time. When he spoke, his voice was quiet again, but everyone in the studio heard every word. If standing up for honest conversation makes me a relic, then I'll wear that badge proudly. Better to be a relic with integrity than whatever it is you're supposed to be. I'm successful, Strahan shot back. I'm relevant. I'm what people want to see in the morning. No, Michael, you're safe. You're predictable. You're exactly what your corporate bosses want because you don't challenge anything. You don't make anyone think. You just smile and nod and cash your checks. That's not success. That's surrender. The words hit like a physical blow. Strahan's face went from red to almost purple. You arrogant son of a... But Clint cut him off. Watch your language, Michael. This is morning television. Families are watching. The way he said it, with that slight smirk, was the final insult. He was throwing Strahan's own words back at him. Strahan lunged forward like he was going to actually do something, but two producers grabbed him and held him back. Get him out of here, Strahan screamed. Get him the hell out! Clint didn't hurry. He didn't storm off in anger. He just walked away with that same calm, steady pace, like he was walking off a movie set after a good day's work. Behind him, chaos erupted. Strahan was shouting at the producers, crew members were scrambling, and somewhere a director was probably having a heart attack trying to figure out how to salvage the show. As Clint reached the studio door, one of the younger crew members, a kid who couldn't have been more than 25, held it open for him. Mr. Eastwood, the kid said quietly, for what it's worth, you were right about everything. Clint paused and looked at the young man. For the first time since the interview started, he smiled. Not a big smile, just a small one that reached his eyes. Keep that integrity, kid. Don't let this business take it from you. Then he walked out, leaving behind a studio in complete turmoil. The door closed behind him with a soft click that somehow sounded louder than all of Strahan's shouting. Back on the set, Strahan was pacing like a caged animal, running his hands over his head. Can you believe that guy? He said to anyone who would listen. The nerve. The absolute nerve. One of the producers, a woman who'd been in the business for decades, stepped forward. Michael, we need to go to commercial and figure out how to handle this. Handle this? Strahan spun on her. There's nothing to handle. He made himself look like a fool. Did you see how he acted? Like he's too good for this show. Michael, the producer said carefully. He kind of had a point about some of those questions. Strahan's eyes went wide. Are you taking his side? I'm not taking anyone's side. I'm just saying, maybe we came at him a little hard. The age stuff, the politics, the retirement questions. It was a lot. It was my job, Strahan insisted. My job is to ask tough questions. There's tough questions, and then there's disrespectful questions. Another crew member muttered, not quite under their breath. Strahan heard it and whipped around. Who said that? Who the hell said that? Nobody answered. The crew all suddenly found very important things to look at on the floor, or the ceiling, or their clipboards. Anything but Strahan's face. The producer touched Strahan's arm gently. Michael, listen to me. We're live in 30 seconds. You need to pull it together. We'll do damage control after the show, but right now, you need to be professional. Strahan took a deep breath, then another. His hands were shaking slightly as he walked back to his chair. A makeup person rushed in to fix his face, dabbing away the sweat that had formed during the confrontation. He took a sip of water, cleared his throat, and tried to find that smile again. But it wasn't the same. The cracks were showing. Meanwhile, out in the parking lot, Clint Eastwood climbed into the back of a waiting car. His assistant, who'd been watching the whole thing on a monitor, looked at him with wide eyes. Mr. Eastwood, that was... Don't, Clint said, holding up a hand. Just drive. As the car pulled away from the studio, Clint looked out the window at the New York City skyline. He didn't look angry anymore. He didn't look upset. He just looked tired. Tired of the games, tired of the pretense, tired of people who valued controversy over conversation. Back inside the studio, the show came back from commercial. Strahan's smile was back in place, but it looked painted on now. Well, he said with forced cheerfulness, that was certainly unexpected. Clint Eastwood, everyone, always full of surprises. His laugh sounded hollow. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll have a cooking segment that I promise will be much less dramatic. But the damage was done. In living rooms across America, people were calling their friends and family. Social media was exploding. The The video clips were already being uploaded and shared, and everyone was asking the same question: what the hell just happened on Good Morning America? In the control room, the executive producer was on the phone with network executives, trying to explain the unexplainable. Yes, sir, I understand. Yes, it was live. No, we couldn't have cut away faster. It escalated so quickly. On set, Strahan went through the motions for the rest of the show. He smiled at the right times, laughed at the right jokes, did everything a morning show host is supposed to do. But anyone watching closely could see it. The way his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. The way his hands gripped his coffee mug a little too tight. The way he stumbled over words he'd said 1,000 times before. Because Michael Strahan had just learned a hard lesson. You can be successful. You can be popular. You can have all the fame and money in the world. But if you disrespect a legend, if you try to play games with someone who's been playing them longer than you've been alive, you're going to lose. And you're going to lose badly, in front of millions of people, with no way to take it back. As the show finally ended and the camera stopped rolling, Strahan sat in his chair while the crew cleaned up around him. He didn't move. He just stared at the spot where Clint Eastwood had been sitting, replaying the confrontation in his mind, probably wishing he'd done things differently. But wishes don't change reality. The confrontation happened. The words were said, and Clint Eastwood had walked out of that studio with his dignity intact, leaving behind a host who'd bitten off way more than he could chew. The young crew member who'd held the door for Clint was sweeping up some papers that had fallen during the chaos. He looked over at Strahan and felt something like pity, because he understood what Strahan was probably just beginning to realize. In that confrontation, there had been two men on that stage. One was a legend who'd earned his place in history through decades of hard work, artistic integrity, and refusing to compromise his principles. The other was a guy with a nice smile and a teleprompter, and when those two things collided, there was only ever going to be one outcome. The real always beats the fake. The authentic always exposes the manufactured. And a man with true conviction will always walk all over someone who's just playing a part. Strahan finally stood up and walked off the set without saying goodbye to anyone. His footsteps echoed in the now quiet studio, and with each step, he was probably replaying Clint's words. You're just the face they put on screen. You read other people's words. You're safe. You're predictable. Those words would haunt him. Because deep down, in a place he probably didn't want to look, Michael Strahan knew they were true. And that truth hurt more than any insult ever could. The studio lights dimmed one by one as the crew finished packing up. In a few hours, they'd be setting up for tomorrow's show, and everything would look the same. But something had changed. Everyone who'd witnessed that confrontation knew it. You could see it in their faces, hear it in their hushed conversations as they left for the day. They'd watched a master class in integrity. Not from their host, but from a 94-year-old man who refused to play the game, who looked at all the cameras and bright lights and fake smiles and said simply, "No, not today, not ever." And then he walked away, leaving behind a mess that no amount of damage control or spin could clean up, because the truth had been spoken, loud and clear, for everyone to hear. And once truth is out there, once it's been said with that kind of conviction and power, you can't put it back in the box. Somewhere in New York City, in his hotel room or maybe already on a flight back home, Clint Eastwood was probably doing what he always does. Living his life with quiet dignity, not worrying about what people think, not losing sleep over a confrontation that he didn't start but definitely finished. And somewhere else, in a much fancier apartment or maybe still in his dressing room at the studio, Michael Strahan was learning a lesson that every host, every interviewer, every person with a microphone and a platform should learn. Respect isn't given because of ratings or popularity. Respect is earned through how you treat people, especially when the cameras are rolling and the whole world is watching. Clint Eastwood had earned his respect over 60-plus years of making art that mattered, of telling stories that touched people's hearts, of never compromising his vision or his values. Michael Strahan had squandered his respect in less than 20 minutes by treating a legend like a target, by going for the cheap shots and the easy controversy, instead of the meaningful conversation. And that, more than anything else that happened in that studio, is what people would remember. Not the specific insults or the dramatic moments, but the fundamental difference between a man who stood for something and a man who just stood where he was told to stand. The lights in the studio went completely dark. The building settled into its nighttime quiet. And outside, the city kept moving, kept living, kept spinning forward. But for everyone who'd been in that studio, who'd watched that confrontation unfold, something had shifted. They'd witnessed something real in a world that's usually so carefully scripted and controlled. They'd watched Clint Eastwood walk away, head high, dignity intact, principles uncompromised. And they'd watched Michael Strahan stand there, exposed and diminished, realizing too late that he'd picked a fight he could never win. Not because of Clint's age or his fame or his legacy, but because of something simpler and more important. Because Clint Eastwood knows who he is, and Michael Strahan was still trying to figure it out. That's the real story of what happened on Good Morning America. Not just a confrontation between a host and a guest, but a collision between authenticity and pretense, between substance and style, between a man who'd lived his truth for almost a century and a man who was still reading his truth off a card. And in that collision, there was only ever going to be one winner.